Good afternoon, everybody. You're very welcome to the first episode of Pillars for Performance. So this is the first episode of 3 that we're running to help our advertisers understand how to get the most out of their AdWords search activity and what are the key strategies that you need to be thinking about for 2018 to set up for your search activity to really drive the most performance. So today what we're going to be covering is automated bidding for search. So my name is Eileen Gann, and I am an automation and attribution specialist for the UK team. So I've been working in the area of attribution and automation for about 2 or 3 years here at Google. So I am fairly well versed, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Tom.
Hi guys, thanks Eileen. My name's Tom Gillespie and I'm an account strategist within the UK mid-market team. And thank you all for joining us on a Monday. So just to remind everyone very early doors, this link that you're on currently will be a recording of today's session. So you'll be able to access this later on if you feel that we might be, if in the case that we're going through stuff too quickly or you want to do a bit more of a deeper dive, you'll be able to rewatch it again at your own leisure and we'll be sharing it out.
And one final point of housekeeping, if you look on the video that you're watching at the moment, you should see a chat box on the right-hand side. So we're going to stop 3 times during this session. We should take about 45 minutes, but we're going to stop 3 times to answer your questions. So if any questions come to you while we're presenting on any of the topics, just feel free to type the question into the chat box and we'll have 3 breaks where we'll go to those questions and we'll try and answer them as best as possible. Okay, so what are we covering today, Tom?
Awesome. So the biggest, there's a few kind of key areas on what we're covering today and making sure that at the end of this session, you're walking away feeling empowered around automated bidding solutions and how they're going to be helping your business. So the first things first will just be understanding the different types of bidding solutions within AdWords. And then we'll be moving on to how to identify the right bidding strategy dependent on the goals and the campaign types that you have on offer. Then we'll be moving along into making sure that we're setting up the bidding strategy correctly and getting all the right infrastructure in place. And then finally, we'll be moving on to how we go about measuring the impact that smart bidding's brought about and that we're comparing all the right data in the right time frame.
So like I said, we have about 45 minutes to get through all of that material, leaving plenty of time for your questions. So before we get into the, how to set up smart bidding strategies and how to understand the different strategies, I just want to take 2 minutes to kind of set the scene as to why smart bidding and automated bidding is becoming such a crucial part of every marketer's sort of suite of tools to success for 2018. And the big reason for this is that we all know consumer behavior is becoming far more complex. So we now know that our customers are online more and more often. Everyone has a smartphone. Sometimes people have 2. They're online much more often throughout the day. So what that means is that we have far more signals about what your customers are searching for, who they are, what they're actually interested in seeing, and what they're actually interested in purchasing. And what that means is that we have far more signals to connect the advertiser, with the customer that's looking for what you're selling. And what that means as well is that marketing technology has become far more sophisticated in trying to process and utilize all of this data. So to give a more concrete example of what this actually means, let's say we go back 10 years ago. Some of you may have been setting up AdWords accounts back then. And if you were advertising on search, really all you had to worry about in terms of optimization was what was the correct bid to set for each individual keyword. So you had, say, a generic campaign and a brand campaign, and all you really had to worry about was the appropriate bid to set for each different type of keyword. Obviously, with the proliferation of devices and audience information, now you have information about what device that customer is on, what day of the week are they searching on, where are they located, what time of day it is. And then on top of this, again, we have all this audience type information. So what is the demographic of that user? A woman who's in the 25 to 34 demographic is going to have far different interests than, say, a man in the 45 to 55 category. What location they're in, what language their browser is set to. All of these signals make it really, I guess, give you really powerful insight into, who your most valuable customers are. They enable you to really target them in very specific ways and pay exactly what you want to pay for them. And also to understand who's less valuable that you can spend less money on so you become more efficient. But obviously with this level of insight comes a huge amount of complexity. And basically, it is almost impossible now to manually assess all of these different factors and set all of the correct bids across all of these different variables. And that's really where utilizing some form of smart bidding comes into play and why it's becoming so crucial. If you're not using a form of smart bidding, you're basically ignoring all of these signals because it's just not possible anymore for, say, someone who's optimizing their AdWords account to just download a spreadsheet every day and look at all of these variables and set the correct bid. So what smart bidding does is that it utilizes Google's new machine learning technology, and this can analyze up to 70 million signals within 100 milliseconds. So basically, all of these types of information, what keyword a user is looking at, what their search history is, how recently they've been to your site, what their demographic is, what their location is. And based on all of these things, it sets the perfect bid for that user in real time for each individual auction. So it's incredibly powerful technology. And to give you a bit of an idea about what kind of results that can deliver, we've got a good case study from Tom.
Perfect. Thanks, Eileen. So here we have an example from the UK business Hostel World. So this was taken from the Think with Google blog, and this is a perfect example of a business that has been able to win more customers within their budget, thanks to leveraging not only a smart bidding strategy, but also taking into a broader understanding of their customer journey through a data-driven attribution. So this is an area which we'll be touching on in our final week's episode of the Pillars for Performance in Attribution. But this is a great example where an advertiser that's not only been able to look at the entire customer journey with each interaction and touch point measured in the value that is associated with it, but then also layering that on top with a smart bidding strategy, in this instance, ECPC, which was then being able to really find that sweet spot to not only improve their conversion rate, but also saw a huge increase in bookings as well as lowering the costs of that acquisition. So now we're on to the next section in terms of how we're going about identifying the right strategies for your business. So when looking at which bidding strategy is going to get you the most bang for your buck, we want to be making sure that it's aligned with your marketing goals. So at the top here, we have, dependent on your campaigns, if it's all about building up brand awareness or driving through as many visitors to your site as possible, that's when we would be recommending what's referred to as the target outranking share or maximize clicks. Now, if we're now looking at if we're more focused in how can I be driving more leads through to my site or more sales or driving a higher return on my ad spend or more purchases on site, that's when we would recommend looking towards a smart bidding strategy. So if we're looking at this graph here in terms of the spectrum of bidding strategies available to us, we're going to be going into each of the key 4 bidding strategies into greater detail, but moving along from a low ROI to a higher profitability mindset. We'll be looking at manual bidding at one end of the spectrum, and then you're going to, within the suite of smart bidding solutions, you've got the likes of enhanced cost per click, maximize conversions, target CPA, and target return on ad spend, also known as target ROAS. So moving into doing a bit of a deep dive into each of these 4 strategies, as well as when we would use them and making sure that you've got all the right signals pointing to a green light that it's going to work for you. We'll kick those off now.
Before we get into that,
before we do that, before you tell you about the improvements.
Exactly. So I know that many of you will probably be familiar with some of these bid strategies already. So many of you may have tested, say, target CPA, target cost per acquisition, or target ROAS within your shopping campaigns, your search campaigns previously. And some of you may not have had the best experience with it. So essentially, we are aware that in the past, our smart bidding solutions haven't been as good as they could be. And some of you may have been slightly disappointed by the performance that you got. So what I really want to emphasize is that over the last 6 months to a year, we've completely rebuilt all of our smart bidding products. So basically, target cost per acquisition, target return on ad spend, and enhanced CPC have all been completely rebuilt, and they perform far, far better now. So based on studies that we've seen really, really strong performance for advertisers who have adopted these solutions. So if you have had a negative experience with smart bidding in the past, please do consider trying it again. It's almost an entirely different product now, and it's far, far better. And we've seen much stronger performance with the rebuild. So some examples of improvements that we've made: we can now distinguish much better between the physical location of a customer and the location that they're interested in. So for example, if you're selling hotel rooms and someone is searching for a hotel in London, we instinctively know that that person is probably more valuable than someone who's looking for a hotel in Hull, for example, and they're probably going to spend a bit more money. We can also have much greater visibility into the audiences that are visiting your site. So how this might work, for example, is that a customer who's previously been to your site would normally have, a stronger intent signal. We'd bid up a bit more. But we've now refined that even further. And we know that someone who filled the cart on your site last week is probably much more valuable than someone who filled a cart on your site last month. They're probably still in that purchase cycle. So we can actually include that kind of information in how we're bidding. And then we look at things like, say, if you have an app, what kind of rating do people have on apps for your website? So we've made an awful lot of improvements. But let's dig into the 4 different bid strategies that Tom gave an overview of. So the first bid strategy that we have here is target CPA. So target CPA stands for target cost per acquisition. And essentially what that means is that, say you are an advertiser that is generating leads for a law firm. So you're getting leads for, say, people who've been missold insurance, for example. And you know that you can, once you're generating leads that cost £20, for example, you can sell them on for £40. So as long as you're generating leads for £20 a lead, you're making a profit. So basically, how this would work for you is that you tell AdWords how much budget you have, and you set a target of £20 a lead, or a target CPA, let's call it, of £20 a lead. And then what happens is that AdWords goes and it sets all of the bids based on that target. So you don't have to worry about any of the individual keyword bids or device bids or time of day bids. AdWords sets all of the bids for you based on all of the signals that we have about how your customers have behaved in the past. And this uses, like I said, this uses our machine learning technology to understand what the best bid to set for each customer is. It constantly learns and updates. And it also is a huge benefit if you are kind of a time-strapped person who's managing, say, multiple different campaigns. You can set this up and you can let AdWords take care of all of the work of optimizing. So target CPA is suitable for search activity and it's suitable for display campaigns. And like I said, it's really intended for advertisers who are trying to drive a volume of conversions at a set CPA. So when should you be using target CPA? So really, I'd recommend using target CPA if your goal is to drive more conversions at a specific CPA. Now that might sound really obvious, but what it really means is that, say if your goal is to actually, say for your brand campaigns, your goal is to be in position 1 and have 100% impression share, then maybe target CPA isn't the strategy for you. Maybe then you should be having a strategy that just is to be in position 1 all the time, like target outranking share. Or let's say you're selling a product online and your actual goal is to generate maybe 50K worth of revenue a week. You want to drive revenue, not the volume of conversion. So in that case, something like target return on ad spend that Tom will explain later is a more suitable strategy. So really, target CPA is if what you're looking at is the number of conversions rather than clicks or revenue. And then the other thing that you should look at if you want to use target CPA is looking in the AdWords Opportunity tab to see if your campaign has a positive simulation for target CPA. So I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on where to find the Opportunities tab later on, but really that's the single biggest thing I would remember if you're remembering anything about when to use target CPA. Use it if an opportunity appears in the AdWords Opportunity tab. Okay, now to tell us a bit more about target ROAS.
Perfect. So moving on to target return on ad spend, or target ROAS strategy. This is the bidding strategy focused towards an advertiser who's maybe more retail focused, as well as maybe a business where you're driving through the different conversion actions that you are coming through are worth different values. So that maybe a lead is worth, the average lead coming through via email might be worth £30, but someone who is then coming through over through your call center is worth £50. Now, this is where target return on ad spend is able to kind of kick into gear, because it's working towards a particular revenue margin that you may have to hit as a target. So for every dollar that you're putting into AdWords and we want to be getting 6 back, this is when we would be able to use target ROAS as the bidding strategy. So then it's going to work towards hitting that figure for you. In terms of when, the ideal scenarios of when to be using target ROAS, first and foremost, if we're leveraging a shopping campaign, this is going to be your new best friend. Secondly, we want to also be making sure we would be recommending target ROAS if you have conversions that vary in value and you want to get as many, you just want to get as much value as possible at your return on ad spend. Finally, the biggest thing that we would be recommending when using target ROAS is if your campaign has a high volume of volumes of conversions coming through the door, because the more data that we have for the system to learn from, the better the performance is going to be. Now, moving along to the third smart bidding strategy, this is maximize conversions. Now, this is when advertisers want to be driving as many conversions as possible within your specified budget. Now, maximize conversions and enhance cost per click may have a few similarities, but the most kind of like common situations where you would want to be using maximize conversions is when you have very strict budgets that you have to play within, and you may not have a particular target CPA that you need to achieve. You're just trying to get as many conversions as possible within your daily budget. Now, in terms of the prerequisites for kicking off maximize conversions, your campaign would only need to historically need to see at least 15 conversions over the last 30 days. And another indicator of when to spot a campaign that would be best suited for maximize conversions is when you're noticing that your campaign is already being limited by budget and you're nearly tapping out all of the impression share, anywhere from kind of 90 plus.
I have one final point on max conversions before we move on, is that this is really the strategy to use if you do care a lot about driving conversions, but you have very fixed budgets. So let's say you have £1,000 a day to spend on your AdWords account and you're absolutely fine spending that entire budget, then maximize conversions is the strategy for you. If you have more unlimited budgets and all you're trying to hit is a target cost per acquisition or a target return on ad spend, then max conversions isn't the strategy for you, because max conversions will try and spend your entire daily budget for a campaign. So it really is for, if you have limited budgets for certain product types and you're happy to spend that budget, then think about max conversions. And then we finally come on to our last smart bidding strategy, which is enhanced CPC, or enhanced cost per click. So essentially, enhanced cost per click is probably the least powerful of all of the bidding strategies that we discussed above, but it's also the easiest to implement, and it has the least amount of eligibility criteria. So in plain language, basically, eCPC is a good fit for any campaign. So how enhanced cost per click works is that you set the base level bids for all of the keywords within your account, just as you would if you were using manual bidding. And then enhanced cost per click understands for each auction, it sees all of the signals that we discussed earlier. So it sees, say, the history of the performance for that keyword, it sees the user's demographic history, it sees the device they're on. And if it sees that there's a greater chance of converting within that auction, it will increase the bids. And if it sees that there's actually a worse chance of converting, it will decrease the bids. And it has freedom to do that within each individual auction. But what it does do is that it keeps the average cost per click at the level that you've set for it. So basically, if you say that on average you're willing to pay £2 per click within a particular campaign, enhanced cost per click will have the freedom to bid up and down at each individual auction. But if you're looking at the average cost per click over, say, 2 or 3 days, it will always stay at the level that you've set for it on average. So it's not going to go above that. So some of the advantages that it has is, first of all, it allows you to remain in control of the base bids if that's something that's important to you. And it does allow you then to benefit at the same time from all of the machine learning data that we have access to and all of the bidding automation tools that you have in AdWords. it's also really, really helpful if you are using a third-party bidding tool. So let's say you are getting an awful lot of value from your third-party bidding provider or partner. You can actually get the best of both worlds by using enhanced CPC. So a lot of the time, if you're using a third-party tool, you'll actually get better performance from both your third-party tool combined with enhanced cost per click than you'd get with either by themselves. So you kind of get to use the best of both worlds. And this solution is available for search, display, and shopping. So like I said, there's pretty much no campaign that can't use enhanced CPC. So when would I recommend using enhanced cost per click? The main reason would be if you want to drive more conversions but still maintain control over the keyword level bids and the device level bids, then enhanced cost per click is a good solution for you. If you are just starting off with bidding automation and you're a little bit skeptical about some of the more advanced solutions, then enhanced cost per click is a great place to start. Like I said, it's a fantastic place or a fantastic solution if you are using a third-party bidding tool. You can use enhanced cost per click to complement that third-party tool. And then finally, if you have campaigns that don't have enough volume for the other bid strategies that we discussed. So if you don't have enough conversion volume for target CPA or target ROAS, then enhanced cost per click is a great second best option. So we've gone through 4 main strategies here. So it might be useful just to have a quick recap of how you'd kind of go through a decision process to decide which strategy to use for which campaign in your account. So where I would start is the first thing I'd do is I'd find the campaigns that are eligible to use target CPA or target ROAS. And whenever you have a campaign that's eligible to use that strategy, that's the best one to use. So what we found in studies is that if you apply target CPA to a campaign that, first of all, fulfills all the criteria, and Tom's going to go through that in detail, and secondly, appears in the opportunities tab as an opportunity, on average, we see a 31% uplift in conversions for those campaigns. So there's massive potential to grow your sales volume or grow your conversion volume by using target CPA. So whenever you have a campaign that fits all of the requirements for target CPA or target ROAS, we'd strongly recommend starting with that. For campaigns then that don't quite have enough volume to use target CPA or target ROAS, we'd recommend max conversions. And then finally, for everything else, eCPC is the solution that you can use. So if you don't have enough volume to use the strategies above, then enhanced cost per click is a great kind of catch-all solution that doesn't have any eligibility criteria. It's suitable for all campaigns, and it's suitable if you're using a third-party bidding tool. And just to give you an idea about the performance that you see from enhanced cost per click, on average what we see is that advertisers who use enhanced cost per click see a 7% increase in conversion volume. So it's a really kind of, I guess maybe a slightly a lower value strategy, but there's no criteria that you need to fulfill to use enhanced cost per click. So the next thing that we're going to cover then, I think we're actually going to have, before we get into eligibility criteria and everything, we're going to have some time for questions because I know we've gone through a lot of content. So if any of you have questions about anything that we've just gone through, you'll see in the chat window to the right-hand side of the YouTube video, you can input questions there. So we're going to spend about 3 or 4 minutes just reading off your questions from Tom's laptop here and doing our best to answer them. So please feel free to start typing in. Okay, do we have any questions yet?
Not as of yet.
Okay, we don't see anything typed in yet.
Would it be worth going through a couple of the example questions as far as potential thought starters? So
while we're waiting for people to type in questions, I think we have a few questions that we tend to get an awful lot.
So one of the more common questions would be around potentially the concern either that they've done one of Google's smart bidding strategies in the past and then didn't really see the results, or it just escalated in spend, or we didn't see the conversions coming through. Now, whilst Eileen has kind of like covered a bit of ground in terms of the most recent improvements that we've seen just as recently in the last 6 months, there's also kind of a few key areas which can often kind of be like a silent killer for with our campaigns that have used a smart bidding strategy, where we've felt that maybe it was the strategy that let us down, but actually it was more that we didn't kind of have all the necessary kind of like plumbing in place that we would see the best results. So without kind of giving too much away, we'll be going into that in greater detail in the second half of this presentation, so we will be covering that ground, but that's something that we really want to be emphasising, that it's all well and good leveraging a smart bidding strategy, but we really need to emphasise that we've gotten everything down to kind of like an ads per ad group, and making sure that there's consistent themes, or that we've even just allowed a necessary time for the learning period to come through, and we're not kind of making too hasty decisions on a campaign performance just yet.
What we find is that, something like target CPA is a really, really powerful strategy, but it's really, really important that you, first of all, pick the right campaigns like we've just discussed, and then it's really important that you implement it properly. So we'll spend some time going through all of that. Okay, I don't think we have any questions. Oh, we might have a question coming through. Okay.
Perfect.
So for the smart bidding options that you mentioned and the location signals, etc., do you have to select these when choosing your smart bidding strategy, or will this be included in that one that's picked? So basically all the signals that I mentioned are all automatically included in all of our smart bidding solutions. So everything from like what that keyword has performed historically, the device, the location of the user, whether or not they visited your site recently or added something to cart, that's all automatically included in the data that a smart bidding solution uses before it sets its bid for each auction. So everything that we just discussed in terms of the signals that we use, that's automatically included in all of our smart bidding options.
So we've also got another very good question from James. What happens when multiple advertisers are using smart bidding? How does AdWords decide the outcome of the auction? So it's not entirely dependent on just who is paying the most. Other factors that are taking into account is obviously going to be your quality score, and that's looking at how relevant your ads have been to that particular query, in terms of how relevant the content on your website is and that expected click-through rate. And then the final one is then looking at the quality of our bidding.
So it would be the history for each the history of each individual advertiser's account. So let's say that you are a retailer, for example, and you're bidding on, I'm just looking for an example, like let's say you're selling outdoor clothing. So you're selling clothing for outdoor enthusiasts. Generally, like if you are a very local brand and you just sell, say, in the north of the UK, you're going to have a much better quality for users who are from the north of the UK because you're much more relevant to those users. So therefore, for those users, smart bidding will probably set your bids higher for those users, and maybe set them, lower for users who have less of a history of actually purchasing from you. And the same if you're searching or you're targeting slightly different demographics. So let's say you're an outdoor brand that tends to target a slightly older demographic versus a brand that's more popular with a younger demographic. Smart bidding can see all of that history and bid appropriately for each of those different types. And I think the final thing is that smart bidding is really dependent on what an advertiser says that they are willing to pay. So say if you are setting your target CPA at a level that really makes sense for your business, so you can pay anything as long as it's below £20 a purchase or £5 a purchase. That's really the final thing that makes sure that smart bidding works for your business. You need to set your target at a level that means it's profitable for you to hit that target. Okay.
So we've got one last from Ruslan. Hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Why, when we use target CPA and increase the campaign daily budget for the CPA, when we use target CPA and increase the daily budget, the cost per acquisition increases sometimes a lot. At the moment, we're trying to increase the daily budget gradually to reduce this effect.
Okay, that's a really good question. So I think the key thing that you need to bear in mind here, and we're going to go through this in a little bit more detail later on, but when you do set up a target CPA strategy, you do need to give it a week or two for the algorithm to go through a learning phase so it understands how to set the bids to achieve that target CPA. So you can see a week or two initially where the performance is slightly bumpy. And what I'd say, if you have had experience, so first of all, if this has happened to you, say, a year or more ago, I'd give target CPA another shot because the algorithm has been updated. It's a lot more sophisticated now, so I'd give it another try. And then I think the second thing is just make sure that the target CPA that you're setting is at a sensible level, so that it's close to what you've been achieving historically, but it's also a level that you're comfortable paying that target CPA, and then give it that 2 weeks to stabilize. But we'll get into more detail about the learning period in a little bit.
Yeah, I would just add to that as well, that it would be if you were making the changes that are maybe too large from kind of like what's been historically, that's what's going to kick it back into gear in that learning period. So if it's more of kind of why I imagine that when you're making just kind of these smaller daily budget increases, that's going to be, that won't be making it vulnerable to having to restart that learning period again. Would that be fair?
Yeah. So ideally, if you're starting target CPA, your daily budget should be at a level that basically you're not losing any impression share due to budget. That's kind of a rule of thumb for setting up target CPA. If you are losing impression share due to budget and you can't afford to increase the daily budgets anymore, maybe think about max conversions as a strategy, or ECPC instead of target CPA, because really you need to have no impression share lost to budget for target CPA to work best. Okay. We'll move on to the next.
But yeah, thanks for sharing the questions, guys. All very good.
Yes, thanks for the questions. And like I said, if you have any questions that come up throughout, just feel free to type them in and we'll have 2 more breaks for questions. Okay, moving on. So we have, I think, emphasized enough how important it is to set up the bidding strategy correctly. So Tom, I think you're going to go into...
Yep.
Yes, Tom, you're going to go into a little bit more detail on how to set up your bidding strategy correctly. And really, we're talking here about target CPA and target ROAS.
Exactly. So when we're kind of looking at making sure that we've got all of our ducks in a row before kicking off a smart bidding strategy, we want to put that into 3 different sections. So we're planning accordingly, we're implementing correctly, and then we're also, once we've done those first 2, that's when we want to be making sure that we're measuring it accordingly and looking at the right statistics. So first and foremost, how do we go about selecting the best campaigns to be moving to smart bidding? So whilst we would be recommending kind of like moving to a full bidding automation, which means applying a smart bidding strategy to every campaign in our account, we don't expect for you to make that move, to move everything all in one go. Therefore, we want to be start by kind of like a slow and steady start by transitioning campaigns in your account from which smart bidding will unlock the greatest opportunity for you. So in terms of guidelines on what we want to be seeing to be able to pick the best candidates, whether it be for a target CPA or target ROAS strategy, we want to be looking at asking ourselves these 4 questions. So we want to be looking for campaigns that have less than 70% impression share. And the reason because of this is that it will have more, those with less than 70% impression share will have more flexibility to grow and capture that additional demand. Secondly, we want to be looking at campaigns that aren't, that are not budget constrained. So as Eileen mentioned earlier, if we are already looking at hitting that daily budgets and we're very strict on that, maybe maximised conversions would be the better fit, because when we don't have that budget constraint, that's going to allow the learning process to not be hampered. The third one that we want to be looking at is making sure that our campaigns have a higher conversion volume. So this is because the algorithms work best when they have a large quantities of data to analyze and learn from. And then it will also mean that learning period will fluctuate less the more conversions that it's got to learn from. And finally, we want to be looking at campaigns that the conversion delay is less than 7 days. Now, a long conversion delay, the conversion delay is looking at the time period from when someone first clicked on your ad and then all the way through to converting. And when we have it, when that time period is longer than 7 days, it's harder for the algorithms to bid accordingly and accurately.
So what we'd say, like, and kind of as Tom mentioned, if you have had a bad experience with, say, target CPA or target ROAS in the past, it could be for these kind of 4 reasons here. So if you have very high impression share and you're budget constrained and you've got a low volume of conversions, then there's a pretty strong chance that something like target CPA is not going to deliver value for you, and there's probably a better automated bidding strategy that you could use instead. Perfect. So we have a great pro tip here for how to pick out campaigns that will give you the most value from using target CPA. So Tom, if you could give me the clicker. So if you use the AdWords Opportunity tab, that will automatically surface the campaigns that, first of all, meet all of the criteria that we just discussed. And secondly, AdWords can see that it has the most potential for actually getting either better performance or more volume. So you can find the Opportunities tab if you're in the new interface in AdWords. If you are in the Campaigns report and you go to the left-hand side, you'll see there's a button there called Opportunities, and it's outlined in green. So you just select Opportunities. And then within opportunities, you'll have, multiple different opportunities within the account. But the one you really want to look out for is get more conversions at a lower or similar CPA with a fully automated bidding strategy. And what this is all of the campaigns within your account that are, first of all, suitable to use target CPA. And secondly, we can see in AdWords, using our kind of simulated data, that you would actually get better performance from using target CPA. So these are really the campaigns, if you want to start off using target CPA, these are the campaigns that you should be trying first. So within this button, you'll see at the bottom, there's an option to view opportunities. And what this will do is it'll take you into each individual campaign. You'll see exactly how much uplift you could gain. It'll tell you exactly what to set the target CPA at. And from that, you can pick 5 or 6 campaigns that you want to start off with trying target CPA from. So it's a really, really great tool and a really great resource. The second thing that I want to cover quickly is just for all of the campaigns that are not going to hit all of those criteria and won't be suitable for target CPA or target ROAS, then it is really, really simple to implement Enhanced CPC, and you can do that with one click. So how to implement Enhanced CPC is that you go into your individual campaign, and then on the left-hand menu bar, you see there's a settings button that I've outlined in green. And then you simply need to go into campaign settings, go down to bidding, select change my bidding strategy. And sorry, you don't even need to select change my bidding strategy. What am I saying? You'll just see a tick box actually under your campaign if you're using manual CPC. And all you need to do is tick that box, and it will automatically opt your campaign into Enhanced CPC with one click. So really what I'd say is start off in the opportunities tab to find some campaigns that are suitable for target CPA. And then any of the campaigns that are not, you can implement Enhanced CPC with just one click, and it's incredibly simple to do. And as we discussed earlier, you can get up to a 7% uplift in conversions from using Enhanced CPC. It's suitable for all campaigns, and there is virtually no risk associated with Enhanced CPC. So there's no bad implementation of Enhanced CPC. There's no campaign that's not a good fit for Enhanced CPC. So you don't have to worry that, it's not going to give you good results. Okay, perfect. So Tom's going to go into a little bit more detail now about other things that you can do within your campaigns to make sure that smart bidding has the best possible chance to succeed.
Cool. So we've knocked over the planning phase, and now it comes into looking at the right implementation. So we want to be making sure that we're following AdWords as best practice. Now, while this isn't compulsory, this is the elements that we've seen that would be the most conducive environment to setting yourself up for success. So I'm just going to kind of whiz through the top 4 now, and then I'll be going into a greater explanation in each. But when we're talking about having the right infrastructure or getting our plumbing right before we're kind of building on top of this, the 4 things that we want to be looking for is making sure that first and foremost, do we have 3 or more expanded ads within each ad group? Secondly, we want to be making sure, are we applying all the relevant audience lists that we want to be targeting, whether at a campaign or ad group level? Thirdly, when building out your search campaigns, are my ad groups focused around a specific theme and directing to a singular landing page? And finally, we want to be making sure that if we've gone about setting a target CPA or a target ROAS strategy, is that target near the current campaign performance? So this would be one of the ones that might have brought us unstuck in the past, where we might have been performing at an average of £50 CPA in the last 30 days, but we've viewed the target CPA strategy as the solution of this. It's like, well, now I want to start paying £30 of conversions. That's when it's really going to start to fluctuate at its most, because it's now being asked to kind of overperform what it's currently done over the previous 30 days. So going into a deep dive in terms of those key buckets. Now, looking at why do we want to be having 3 ads per ad group? So writing at least 3 distinct ad creatives within the same ad group ensures that the system can test each variation and ensure that it's serving the right ad to the right user at the right time, boosting the likelihood of achieving your targets. Now, secondly, why do we want to be leveraging all these audience lists? This is because by adding audience lists to your campaigns, our algorithms will automatically take into account rich user signals, such as intent, context, or recency, and adjust the bids for those key audiences. So when we're layering on top of a previous visitor to your site versus maybe a cart abandoner, we're able to, the system is able to recognize that those in the list of the cart abandoner, based off their intent, are going to be much more valuable and going to bid accordingly, while still recognizing previous visitors to your website. Moving on to the third bucket in terms of making sure that we're setting ourselves up for success is because we want to be making sure that each ad group has that really kind of like singular focus. So building ad groups that push users to a singular landing page allow you to be super targeted with not only your keywords, but also your ad copy. So users see the ads that are highly specific to their needs. The more relevant that the ads are, the more likely that the user will click through and convert, ultimately helping you hit your conversion goals.
One caveat that I'd add to this is that, let's say you're a retailer and you're selling jackets. So you might have a category for men's jackets and an ad group for women's jackets and an ad group for children's jackets, and then ad groups for different brands. That's all fine because that's sending people through to different pages of the website. What you don't want to do for smart bidding to work best is you don't want to split ad groups into things like exact keywords for men's jackets, broad match keywords for men's jackets, mobile for men's jackets. You don't want to start splitting it out into things like match type or device, or say having a structure where you only have one keyword per ad group, because that doesn't give smart bidding the freedom that it needs to decide what are the best keywords to bid on. So be really tightly focused on theme, but don't split out too much by match type or device.
Good shout. So lucky last is making sure that when we have kind of got all previous steps 1, 2, and 3 in place, when it comes to the final bit of setting that target CPA or target return on ad spend, we want to set the target near the last 30-day average of performance. This ensures a faster ramp-up time, and over time you'll be able to gradually reduce that target. So you're not having to set in stone for a target CPA that you might not initially be wanting to kind of be sticking to. It's more that once it's up and running, we can slowly reduce it over time. Now, in terms of, so again, as shown in Eileen's walkthrough in your account, and you are jumping into the campaign and making that change, you will be provided a recommendation within the interface, and that number is going to be looking over your historical performance. So it's good to be taking that into consideration. So now that we've done the implementation, we want to be making sure, and we're kind of starting off that trialing process. What are the main things that we want to be focusing on? So we've already emphasized around making sure that we're being very particular and careful around the targets that we've set. Going forward into that trial period, especially for the first 2 weeks, we really want to be limiting the number of changes to the campaign in that learning phase, because every time that we start making a drastic change within an account, that's going to be restarting the shot clock in that learning period, and you could potentially just be seeing continued results of fluctuation. Thirdly, we want to be making sure that we're not judging the performance too early, because again, when we've moved to a target CPA strategy and it has that learning period, and people might have seen higher targets, a higher CPA than they would have been hoping for coming through in those first 2 weeks, and they pull the plug, and then that's it. However, we'd really expect to be seeing kind of the campaign to be paying dividends in that week 3 and 4. So it's all just about being patient with it. And if we can't be patient with it for a target CPA or target ROAS, maybe it would be better just dipping our toe in the water with something like enhanced cost per click. And the final one is just being mindful of seasonality of trends. So if you've gone about setting a target CPA during a particularly quiet time of the year for your business, and then we don't see these huge results, we might fall prey to blaming it on the target CPA as the reason that we didn't get those conversions, without taking into account that that time of year is pretty quiet for the business. Same again, we wouldn't recommend doing it before your most important time of the year, where we don't want the campaigns to learn from kind of like an unrealistic environment, such as you wouldn't be doing it just before Black Friday, because then it thinks conversions are just going to fall out of the sky, and then it would continue on that performance.
Perfect.
So yeah, we'll go to another question section, and I'd seen one come through earlier. So we've got a question. when we stop, then restart a campaign, does the algorithm need time to adjust?
So if you're talking about pausing a campaign and then unpausing it, that's fine for target CPA. So let's say you have a campaign that you pause every night because your call center is closed and then you want to restart it in the morning, that's absolutely fine. I'd say if you are restarting a campaign after it's been paused for a few weeks, it might be a good idea just to give it maybe a week or so to ramp up data using enhanced cost per click where you set the bids. And then after that, it should have enough fresh data for you to use target CPA or target ROAS instead. So if it's paused after a very long period of time, just give it a week or two to ramp up data and then you can start using full auto bidding. Although I will say for target CPA, you can start using target CPA as a strategy right from the get-go.
Okay.
Any other questions that we have coming through here? So there is a question here about the advantages of using smart bidding through AdWords compared to double-click for search. I'd say there's no clear advantages there. The main reason that I would say you would use smart bidding through double-click for search is if you're working with an agency that uses double-click search as their bidding platform, then it's a very good solution to use, and that's absolutely fine. But apart from that, there's no major advantages or disadvantages in terms of performance. It's just depending on the tools that you're using to manage your account and the kind of what your teams are trained up in.
Perfect. And we've got a question from John. Hi, John. If you wanted to use accelerated as opposed to standard, so this in terms of the delivery method within the campaign setup, how does this work in conjunction with enhanced cost per click or another strategy?
So I guess this really only matters if you have limited budgets and you're thinking that you might run out of budget throughout the day. So generally what we say that's the only time that it's accelerated versus standard delivery matters, right? So if you're using target CPA, you should never be running out of budget. So for enhanced cost per click, it does mean that you're probably going to get better performance while you're live, but if you run out of budget at 4 o'clock in the day and you get a surge in conversions at 5 o'clock, or you could have, enhanced cost per click isn't going to have the chance to take advantage of that. So as a general recommendation, if you have a limited budget, you should set your delivery to standard, unless there's some reason that, say, if you need to turn off at 5 o'clock, you should use scheduling to turn off at 5 o'clock, not running out of budget where you don't really control when your ads stop showing. So we'd always recommend using standard delivery, not accelerated.
Cool.
Any other questions coming through?
So,
okay, I think we're good for the moment.
Yep.
I'm just conscious of time, so we're going to continue finishing off the rest of the presentation, and then we'll have one more round of questions before we wrap up. Okay, perfect. So let's say you've set up your target CPA strategy. You've got 5 campaigns you found in the opportunity tab. You set them up perfectly. You've got 3 ad texts in. You've got all your audiences in. You've set up a realistic target. How do you then measure the success of that strategy? So the big thing to be aware of here is that it's really important not to run your analysis too early. So what we find when you set up target CPA or target ROAS or max conversions, it takes about 1 or 2 weeks of a learning period before smart bidding learns the ideal bid to set for each scenario based on your data and based on your users' behaviors. So really what you need to do is give it that 1 or 2 weeks for the algorithm to calibrate on a new campaign. And what that means is that for the first 1 or 2 weeks when you set up target CPA, you shouldn't make any judgment on the performance being very bad or conversely very good. You need to give it a week or 2 to settle down. And it's only after that period is over that you can start to judge the performance. And what I'd say is you generally need another 1 or 2 weeks of data before you can make a good judgment of the performance. So really what that means is that if you're looking at testing a smart bidding strategy, you want to give it 4 to 6 weeks of testing before you can make a judgment on how it's performed. So allow 1 or 2 weeks for the learning period, and then another 3 or 4 weeks before you actually judge how it's performed. The other thing to really bear in mind here is that the time lag for conversion. So what I mean by that is the average time between someone clicking on your ad and purchasing. So if you're, say, an advertiser that's generating leads, that time is probably going to be quite low. But if you're selling something on your site, or if you're selling something that's quite complex, like, say, a financial product or insurance, or you're selling a more expensive product, it can take time between someone clicking on your ad and actually purchasing. So just bear that in mind when you're looking at your results. So let's say you know it takes about 3 days before someone will purchase on the site. You shouldn't be looking at the most recent 3 days worth of performance to judge the bidding strategy, because it's setting bids for users that, you know, have clicked on ads, but it may take another day or 2 for them to convert. So if you're looking at that most recent 2 or 3 days, you're not seeing the full picture. So you should just just kind of discount the most recent days when you're making a judgment on how your new bidding strategy is performing. And just a final point on the learning period. So if you do set up target CPA or target ROAS, within the campaign itself, you will have a button that shows you whether or not that campaign is within the learning phase or not. So it's a good kind of way of assessing whether or not the campaign is in the learning phase. And like I said, as a rule of thumb, don't judge data from the learning phase to assess the performance of the campaign. And the final thing about the learning period, so Tom mentioned this earlier, if you make changes to the campaign, it does set target CPA and target ROAS back into learning period. So really, I would think about only making changes to the campaign once or twice a month. So it's okay maybe to decrease the CPA by up to 20% once a month, but really you shouldn't be going in and making changes to that campaign every day, because target CPA is never going to get a chance to build up enough data that the learning period will ever end. So that's a couple of things to bear in mind when you're looking at performance. Then the final thing about evaluating the performance of your bidding, so the most important thing, the thing that I see most often that people do wrong, is that you really need to focus on the right metrics when you're assessing success. So if you've selected target CPA as a strategy, the two things you care about most are, first of all, is it hitting the target CPA? And secondly, is it driving enough volume of conversions? What that means is that you don't want to look at things like the number of impressions or the number of clicks. So what I find often is that target CPA will be running, it'll be doing fantastically well, it'll be driving lots of conversions, hitting its target, but an advertiser will say, oh, but my overall impression share has dropped and my number of clicks has decreased. And basically, that's not a metric you should be looking at when you're evaluating target CPA. Target CPA works by not entering auctions that it doesn't see as valuable and not bidding up for users that it doesn't see as likely to convert. So you will see, say, in some cases, a decrease in traffic from target CPA, but as a result, you'll see an increase in conversions. So just bear in mind that, if you are optimizing towards conversions, only look at conversions. If you want more clicks or more visibility, you shouldn't be using target CPA as your strategy. So focus on the right metrics. The next option then for evaluating performance, if you have tested target CPA in the past and you're a little bit wary of it, or let's say you have a huge campaign that drives like 50% of your sales and you just can't risk that 1 or 2 weeks of bumpy performance while it goes through its learning period, we do have a product called Drafts and Experiments that allows you to split campaigns 50-50 and optimize half of them manually as you're normally doing, and then put half of them onto an automated bidding strategy. And what that does is, first of all, reduce the risk of applying target CPA, but secondly, it gives you a really nice side-by-side comparison of how target CPA delivers value versus manual CPC bidding. And then the final thing is, comparing the pre and post. So comparing performance before you use target CPA versus after. So it's not just, what it's performing over that 3 or 6 week period that you're testing it, but it's actually, is it delivering better performance than it was beforehand? Okay, so that brings us to an end of the material that we're going to go through today. So I think what we're going to do is, Tom, do you want to briefly summarize the next steps? Yep. And then we will have a final round for questions and then we will sign off.
Perfect. So yeah, we've seen that there's more questions coming through on the chat. So just in terms of next steps, the main things that you want to be looking for is first and foremost, like what are the best campaigns that are a good fit for smart bidding? And then depending on kind of those marketing goals that you have, you want to be using the best solution for that particular campaign. In terms of the next kind of like a 2-week period, we would want to be looking at implementing your bidding strategy at a campaign level. And then this is where that learning period's occurring. So when Eileen mentioned that we're not going to be judging anything in that first 2 weeks, then allowing in weeks 3 and 4. So it's not 2 weeks, then plus an additional 4 weeks. It's like weeks 1 and 2 is going to be learning, and then weeks 3 and 4 is when it's really going to be coming into its own. And then we would be expecting kind of it to be really hammering that the target that's been set consistently. And then that's when we want to be reviewing the performance in terms of once it's gotten the learning period out of the way. So it's almost kind of the 2 weeks prior to turning on smart bidding, you've got your control period in the middle, and then the post implementations in weeks 3 and 4. And then going on from there, that's where you would be looking to make kind of those incremental adjustments. So then not to kick it back into the learning period or turning it on its head. It's just little improvements over time. So the other one, just so when we're coming to the particular questions, because I know there were some two really good ones that just got popped through in the last section, which I need to, so just in questions, we've got another one from Ruslan. How much does it affect the number of conversions in the past 30 days for the algorithm to adjust? For example, 50 conversions over the month versus 500 conversions over a month. Will it still take the 1 to 2 weeks to adjust?
That is a fantastic question. And the answer is the more conversion volume in a campaign, the shorter the learning period will be. So generally, if you have, say, 50 conversions a month, the learning period will probably be around 2 weeks. If you're getting 500 conversions a month, or say you're getting 500 conversions a week, the learning period will probably only be 3 or 4 days. So definitely the higher volume of the campaigns, the shorter that learning period will be. And like I said, you do have a really handy indicator within the AdWords interface that tells you whether or not a campaign is still in its learning period or not.
Because that's going to take into account the time lag as well. So it'd be impressive if you're getting 500 conversions in a week and normally a time lag of 7 days. So if you're getting 500 conversions a week, we could probably assume that you've got quite a short path to conversion. So that means that there'll be less fluctuation going on. It will kind of like it has all the experience under its belt to be making those confident decisions. The next question from Watchfinder & Co. Would you recommend using AdWords experiments to test a bidding strategy's effect on a campaign before setting it live in the account if you're unsure? And then follow up to that, and then how long should you run the experiment for?
Perfect. So I'd say that drafts and experiments it's a great tool to use if you aren't sure about using a particular bidding strategy. And it's also, like I said, a great tool to use if you've got a particularly big campaign that you don't want to take a huge risk with. So I find drafts and experiments really useful. I would generally run an experiment for between 4 to 6 weeks. As an absolute minimum, you want to run it for 4 weeks. So that gives you 2 weeks of learning period and then 2 weeks of good data that you can actually make a decision from. But then if you sell a product that has a longer conversion time, so you know it takes around a week for someone to purchase, you should really think about running a test for up to 6 weeks.
I would also add in that when you are factoring in creating the drafts and experiments, that you've not only got all kind of the right plumbing in place, but that you've given a fair share of budget, so a 50-50 split between the campaign, because often the
same criteria basically apply to an experiment. So if you take a campaign and you half it, you still need to have, say, a minimum of 50 conversions in half of that, like in the experiment half, for target CPA to work correctly, for example. So don't do something like give it 5% of the budget and expect it to have enough data to work correctly.
Perfect.
Any other questions coming through? I'm going to give it 2 more, I'll give it another 10 or 15 seconds.
I've done that one.
Okay, I think we're all good for questions, and we're also running up on an hour in the Hangout, so we're pretty much running out of time. So I guess the only thing is, if you just go on to the next slide. So the final thing that we'd like to say before we go is that we'd love you to tune in next week. We'll have episode 2 of Pillars for Performance next week, and that's where we're going to focus on all things audience. So how to set up the correct audience strategy for your search campaigns. That will be on March 20th. So this will be on a Tuesday. We're all off work on Monday here in Ireland because it's St. Patrick's Day. So we'll be back to you next Tuesday, the 20th of March at 10 a.m. with our audience session. And I think that's pretty much it from us. So listen, thank you so much for dialing in. We really appreciate your time. This session will be available as a recording on this YouTube link. And thank you very much.
Perfect. Thanks, guys. Really appreciate your time, and feel free to follow up with your respective Google account managers if you've got any kind of particular questions following today's presentation. And thanks for tuning in.